Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you to the Heritage Foundation for convening us to discuss this important topic. As Jennifer stated, my name is Stephen Harris. I serve with the Southern Baptist Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission. Our President Russell Moore sends you his greetings this afternoon as well. I have the privilege of introducing our keynote speaker for this lunch hour. I was very encouraged by Jennifer's invitation as she recognized the necessity of having a Baptist introduce a Baptist. You know, anything else would have been borderline inappropriate, so I appreciate the insight. Our speaker for this afternoon is none other than Senator James Lankford, recently re-elected to the Senate, serving the great state of Oklahoma. Amen. In addition to his committee work, Senator Lankford co-chairs the Senate Values Action Team. And it is in that venue and through one-on-one interaction with him that I learned a little bit about the why of Senator Lankford's work, what drives him from day to day. He is a man of faith, formally trained at a Southern Baptist seminary, might I add. And for him, faith is not merely a weekend hobby, as he once told me, but it's a way of life. It's an ongoing ministry. A ministry that for him began outside of the Beltway, where he spent years serving youth and families in student ministry as director of the Oklahoma Baptist Convention Student Ministry and the director of Falls Creek, the largest youth camp in the country. It is from these experiences alone I can conclude at least two things that speak to the fittedness of Senator Lankford addressing us on the topic of poverty today. Number one, he realizes that a conversation about poverty doesn't merely begin at the point of policy prescription, but it is a conversation about precious people. It is the vantage point that acknowledges the lived experiences and the narratives of what one artist named Sly Stone called everyday people. Number two, Senator Lankford understands the nexus between the essential work of faith entities and transformational impact on familial realities and outcomes that interaction brings. In other words, he understands how the freedom of the former serves the latter. Most recently, he joined with Senator Tim Scott and several other colleagues, you heard Senator Sullivan speak about this earlier, to form the Senate Opportunity Coalition in an effort to relieve poverty and ensure opportunity for families across the country. Lastly, in speaking of families, I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge his own. This is his first ministry as husband to Cindy and father to Hannah and Jordan. Would you please join me in welcoming our speaker for the hour, Senator James Lankford.
All right, impressive introduction, as long as a Baptist introduction as well, so I was ready for you to give an invitation at the end of it. So it is really an honor to be here in this conversation, and I do plan to make this a conversation, by the way. I'm going to speak for a few minutes, then I'm going to open the floor up just for dialogue. I understand this is kind of the closing end of the day, and several things going on in everyone's busy schedule, but I'd love to be able to just have dialogue. I don't come in as a person that says, I have the answer to all things poverty. I come as a person that's a part of an ongoing dialogue of where we are as a country and where we are as an international body as well. And I raised the specific question. You see that house? What are we doing to give opportunity for the family that lives in that house to be able to succeed? Now, not every person in the world and not every person in our country wants to be wealthy. It's a misnomer that everyone attaches happiness to wealth. It's not true. Many people are very content to live simple lives, be with their family, and have deep, intimate relationships with their family. But in our country, we're not in a caste system. And we can't allow any place to be a place where there's no escape from poverty. And if two houses that are next door to each other, one may succeed and one may fail, and you'll always ask the question of why. But both of them should have had equal opportunity. And so what I'm going to show you in part of this, and I want you to think about, is for the people that live at that place. What are we doing to be able to provide them opportunity to be able to escape the life that they live as they choose to? This is not only an important thing just as a nation, that we speak out for those who can't speak for themselves, but there are multiple biblical mandates for those of us that come from the biblical worldview. For those of you that, as I do, many of you probably do as well, I read the proverb of the day every day. Today's the 17th, and so today is Proverbs 17 to be able to read it. And when you're halfway through Proverbs 17:5 says, "Those that mock the poor despise their maker." I don't despise their maker, and I shouldn't despise them, or to be able to leave them in a spot where they're trapped. So the conversation today is really all about policy and what we're going to do and what are the best vehicles and how do we actually take on the issues of poverty and to be able to help resolve it for those individuals that want to engage and that want to be able to take those opportunities. So let me just give you just a few ideas and thoughts. As I look at this, one of the key areas that we have to be able to push back on in a federal government may start in an odd spot for you, but I would say it's an essential place. We have got to resolve as a nation where we are on religious liberty. Because for whatever reason, our country is becoming afraid of people of faith, of all faith. And our nation is trying to pull back and to say, okay, those are people of faith, they need to be on their own. They're not really citizens the same as everyone else is a citizen. The government can participate, engage with people that have no faith, but shouldn't engage with people that have faith. They are a second-class citizen, unattached to our government. That has not been who we are, nor it should be ever who we are. The government should not ask the question, I'm sorry, I need to know before we partner together to take on the issues of poverty whether you have faith. Because if you have faith, you're not allowed to partner with us. That's the spot we're moving to now, and that's a terrible place. Because some of the most effective outreaches and ministries and individuals that are face-to-face dealing with poverty all over our country are people of faith, but frankly of all faith backgrounds. And we as a nation should be willing to partner with people of faith to be able to take on the difficult social issues of our day. Whether it's a prison ministry, whether it's those that are doing the homeless, whether it's those that are taking care of the mental health needs of our nation, whether it's those individuals that are tutoring around schools, whether those that are finding clothing and food, why should the federal government care about their faith? Are they accomplishing the task? Now that simple premise may sound simple, but you and I both know that we're facing currently an administration that is trying to do everything they can to be able to isolate people of faith and to say, really, you also talk about faith and so you need to be out. We've got to be able to turn that back. This basic principle that we are a nation that respects all people of faith or people that have no faith can still be a baseline. And the reason that's important for poverty is our nonprofit entities are so much more efficient at taking care of issues of poverty than the for-profit entities or the federal government by far. The federal government has a long list of requirements if I'm going to help you and you're in poverty. A faith-based organization looks at a person and says, what can I do to help? So I think it's a natural sense of partnership. So as we deal with faith-based issues, I think it's one of the areas that we need to attack and be very, very specific on. If we're going to deal with issues of poverty, we're going to have to deal with baseline things. I know this is a Heritage Foundation, but let me do something radical. I'm going to quote the Brookings group. I know I'm outside the box. I quote it because it's just so stark in the conversation. Brookings, for years, when you ask any of the Brookings scholars, what are the sources of poverty and what do you see as the common denominator? They've used the same three areas for years. Now, they don't talk about it loud, but it comes out over and over again. You want to know how you escape poverty? Ask Brookings and they will tell you, wait till after marriage to have children, graduate high school, and have a full-time job of any type. If those three things are true, you will most likely escape poverty. Wait till after marriage to have children, graduate high school, have a full-time job of any type. Now, I ask the simple question, if we can see that lived out over and over again in so many different entities, in so many different ways, why don't we look for policy areas to be able to reinforce that simple truth? Helping people to be able to finish up their high school. And that's dominantly a state issue. That's not a federal issue. But to be able to help people with their education and to say, what is that going to take to be able to do that in those local communities? Engagement with a job is basically a growing economy. A free market does lift areas of poverty. If you want to see the stark examples of ways to be able to deal with poverty, watch poverty in the United States and compare it to poverty in Cuba, in North Korea, and in China. In communist countries that guarantee a job to everyone, that locks people into poverty for their life, their children's life, their grandchildren's life, forever and ever. In a free market system, and a system that actually honors all people, we allow people to be able to rise out of that and to be able to not only be equipped and trained, but have an opportunity to be able to land a job as well. But this very interesting thing, marriage. Waiting till after you're married to have children has an enormous impact on individuals and on people being able to rise out of poverty. It's one of the things that oftentimes we in government are afraid to talk about. I was very proud of the President when he brought up the Brothers Keeper initiative and focused on trying to help identify what can we do to help mentor and partner with people. It's a good initiative. It's something that we need to continue to be able to press on to be able to encourage fathers to engage with their children. As fathers engage with their children, families stay together. I spend a lot of time talking in my state, typically when I'm doing Q&As on exciting stuff like national intelligence and the budget and all those wonderful things that everyone has all this interest in. I will oftentimes, when I'm finishing up a Q&A time, say, can we set that aside for just a second? And for just a moment, let me talk to you about the core issue of where we are as a nation. Because we can talk about a lot of votes, we can talk about a lot of legislative things, but if we don't deal with the family, we will never turn around our nation, ever. Because the education issues we face are family issues. If you talk to teachers, they will tell you, sure, I'd like to have more money for my classroom. I'd like to have a better building and better facility. But if you want to give me one thing, give me a kid that has a family at home helping them with their homework. And that'll turn the schools around. It helps our schools. It helps us in our criminal justice. If you pull out 5 people out of the criminal justice system right now, only 2 of them had a dad. If you want to help our criminal justice system, if you want to help our schools, if you want to help even employment, you're going to engage in families. When I talk to businesses all around, the #1 thing I hear from people is, I have an opening and I need to hire somebody. All I'm looking for is someone who'll show up to work on time, drug-free. Those are things you learn at home. This matters. The issue of the family is still the driving issue when we deal with poverty and culture. Because when you have successful families, they raise kids that have opportunities and options. And when you have families that are completely disconnected, their kids have a much tougher time. And I would tell you, for families that are in poverty, often single-parent households where the parent has 2 jobs and has very little time with their kids, it's incredibly difficult. They can do it, they can succeed out of it, but it's a harder slog for them. My parents divorced when I was 4 years old. My mom was a librarian. And for my older brother and I, we grew up in a very tiny house on the east side of Dallas, about 3 miles from the Cotton Bowl in Fair Park, if you know where that area is. We grew up really, 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 really simple. And my librarian mom was the smartest woman on the planet in my life. And she worked really hard. But the time that we got together, she invested in my brother and I. And for her, she would look at us and say, there is not an option for you not to go to college. You are going to finish school. You are going to go to college. And that investment and that constant push and her love and attention to us made a world of difference. Single parents can do it. It's just really tough. But reinforcing those families, I think, is something that we can't do enough. When I encourage a lot of people, if you want to take on issues of poverty, here's where you can start, because it's overwhelming. Your family, mentor a young family and help them. Now, it's weird if you walk up to someone and say, I'd like to be your mentor. Okay? You don't have to have an official title, but you know somebody in your neighborhood, in your community, in your church that is around that's just newly married or that's thinking about marriage, that really needs someone to walk alongside of them, because in the decades ahead, they're going to have a really hard time, and you know it. And our families are scattered all over the country and disconnected, and a lot of folks just need somebody to walk alongside with them. You want to make a difference in the nation in the future? You want to make a difference in poverty and the future of our country economically? Mentor a family. It'll make a world of difference. So the simplest things. We've got to deal with helping our nonprofits, because they're engaged in every area. We've got to deal with the family issues. And though it's slow and though it's generational, it is the most effective way that we'll be able to walk people through and to be able to help them through the process. And then we've got to be face-to-face with people. Dealing with poverty is not something you do from a distance. If you don't know somebody's name and you don't know the situations that are there, you're too far away from issues of poverty to actually bring solutions to them. You've got to be there and you've got to be close up. Because the issues are hard and the questions are tough. And as you walk alongside with people, you're going to find out it's not what I thought. As you walk through issues, especially of generational poverty. So I challenge people to be engaged and to be able to find ways to connect close up. I was with a group not long ago called Pocket Full of Hope. It's one of my new favorite groups that's in Oklahoma. They're in the north side of Tulsa. For 20 years they've been there, Dr. Shaw and his wife, in a very simple setting, and they determined years ago they were going to start mentoring young kids, that they were tired of seeing kids that were dropping out of school and disappearing, disconnected from their families. So they started basically doing drama and arts and singing and dance together and after-school tutoring. And they would do it one day a week, and then the tutoring grew to a couple days a week, just trying to help some of these kids in this area. 20 years they've been doing this. They have a 100% graduation rate from high school. 100% graduation rate. Find me a school in America that has that number. Because the Shaws are engaged and they're invested and they're dealing with issues close up with families and walk alongside of them and giving them a sense of hope and of direction and of something to do and of something to be that is important in their life for the future. The other thing that's been interesting for them is they found out the secret of intergenerational mentoring. The parent has to be involved in some way in the task. The parent just can't drop the kid off or send them over. The parent has to be there. And so the parents want their kids to be a part of this. And so Dr. Shaw just says, you are welcome to have your kids a part of this. Here is your commitment as well. And if you don't fulfill your commitment, your kid's out. And those parents come alongside and they help other kids and they show up, and guess what? They meet other parents and they have connections and they deal with some of their struggles, and it just keeps advancing on from there. Because they're investing in ways that actually matter, close up. Helping parents be better parents, helping them to find other people to be able to talk to that are dealing with the same issues they are, meeting people that have gotten out, and figuring out there's a better way to do this. Carl Springer, who used to be the superintendent of schools in the Oklahoma City School District, told me a story about 3 years ago about a young lady who got a full ride scholarship. She's a Latino young lady. She had a full ride scholarship to get to college. First in her family to ever graduate high school, certainly the first in her family to ever go to college. She turned the scholarship down. He has 200 schools in his district, and when he heard the story, he personally went and sat down with her. He personally sat down at the home and said, this is a full scholarship to college. Explained to her what all it is, encouraged her to be able to take it. Her response was, my dad makes $10 an hour. If I start to work next week, I'll make $7.50 an hour, and I will almost double our family's income. Why would I turn that down? She never went to college. She didn't take the scholarship because she could double the family's income the next week. Now, for those of us that went to college and see the benefits and see some of the issues there, could see a girl with incredible promise and think, what just happened? What just happened is normal in families in poverty. They're trying to figure out how to do tomorrow. And if they have the opportunity to do tomorrow, they're excited about graduating high school. It was a big deal, now let's get to work, because we're starving. That's what it really looks like. And all this theory on the outside misses what it looks like for real on the inside. So if there's any area that I can challenge us on, is that as we all struggle together on issues of poverty and on policy, let's make sure we're close enough to make wise decisions in it. Let's not assume some government bureaucrat can write a policy and it will fix this. It will not. Every culture in every part of history has had people of poverty. Every one. There will not be a solution to poverty. Communism has tried that multiple times. But what we have done is different. With our free market system, We have allowed people to have opportunities to be able to escape it in ways that has never been seen in the history of the world. That's a good thing. But if it's not allowed for everybody in every place, that's a bad thing. And so when we talk about opportunities on dealing out of poverty, it's exactly that. Finding an area where the federal government, state and local government is in the way of people escaping poverty, solving that. Finding places where individual ministries and tasks can be engaged and solving that. Because as a kid who grew up in a divorced home with a single mom, she worked really hard. But she had some folks in my church and other areas around her loving on, encouraging her, and blessing her. They came alongside of her. And I get to do this because of it. We can't forget that. And we can't forget each one of these places. And to ask the very simple question when we go by. If we can't solve the issues of poverty and of opportunity for the people that live there, what are we doing? Let me just open this up for questions. What do y'all want to talk about? Uh-oh. It's
Senator,
great to see you, by the way. When I came across the stage, I thought, I sure hope you spoke to this group.
Yeah, I
did. You did? Good.
I did.
Because I would be embarrassed if I spoke. For me, up here speaking on this issue is like me showing up to preach somewhere and Billy Graham is sitting in the audience.
No, that's not.
And the thing, Dr. Graham, you should probably do this.
No, you did a great job, Senator. But I wish you would speak to something you talked about as Brother's Keeper.
Yeah.
The one thing that the left does is that they fund their ground game. When Obama announced his Brother's Keepers, Ford Foundation, all of them rushed and committed $100 million. George Soros just committed, and the Ford Foundation, to raise $100 million to Black Lives Matter. Where is the interest on our side to encourage our philanthropists and the business people who fund your campaign? Why can't we pledge to support our ground game?
Right. I think it's an excellent question. I think most of that happens, from the conservative perspective, most of that happens through our churches, and most of that happens locally. But as a national focus, conservatives have been really weak at trying to get a specific strategy and going after that specific strategy. So I would have to agree with you completely. It has to be a focus to say this is a long-standing entity, and it has to be diverse enough to try to figure out what we're going to do with it. And that's the hard part, is because, as you know well, poverty doesn't have one issue to say, if we solve that, we're there. There's not one. One quick story. In Oklahoma City, there's a group that they're working on refugee resettlement. They had a heart for the refugees that have come in, and they've done this for years. Refugees, as many of you know, they get some funding for right at 9 months. After the 9 months is over, they're on a track toward citizenship, but all of their support is gone after 9 months. So a refugee would be here, and we have about 70,000 a year that come into the country. They would be here, they would get housing, they would be there for 9 months. If they can't land a job, if they can't land a community to land in, they're in trouble. And so this ministry rose up really targeting refugees, trying to help them meet other refugees and to be able to figure out where are you finding jobs and where are you helping connect on it. And they met that need. That's not something some large-scale group's going to do. That's a local group that took that on. And so that's what makes that tougher. Yes, ma'am.
I'm so glad you didn't look at me and say, uh-oh, again.
Oh, no.
I just wanted to affirm what you said about the mentoring, because my dad died when I was 5, and my mother never remarried, and she was an opera singer, so she was gone all the time. And she was also a church musician, and so I was blessed that some people in the church responded with, oh, we love Melissa, let's take Melissa in. I'm Melissa Ortiz, Able Americans, I should have introduced myself. And then other families said, no, we don't want this problem in our house. Which, that's an attitude in the church that we've got to combat. That's an attitude in our society that we've got to combat, is being, quote, bothered with things. And, right. You know, and I've grown out of that, but I want to, I guess my question first of is, how do we combat that? Secondly, let me show you what it looks like when it's combated. I married my husband almost 15 years ago, and last week, as we were honoring the year's anniversary of his death, several of us were just talking about different things, and we all came back to the fact that those of us except for my husband and his sister, had grown up without a dad. And he was our dad. And he just really opened for anybody that needed advice from Artie. Artie was there. And I guess I want to challenge all of us to be an Artie, but to ask you, how do we combat that not wanting to be bothered with either people that don't look like us or people that require extra effort from us?
So that is typically familiarity. You've got to break through the veil at some point. My aunt is a cancer survivor, has been in a wheelchair since 1981. So I grew up and I'm very comfortable around people that are in wheelchairs and people that have disabilities, because I was around it all the time. People that grew up in very diverse communities are comfortable because they grew up in it's normal for them. You got to be able to break through it. When you start dealing with people of differences, the initial first step is realizing I don't know how to do this, and then starting it. We started from our team, when did we start Solution Sundays? 3 months ago, 4 months ago? July. Thank you very much, DJ. July. So we started this very simple idea, and I just started asking everybody that I ran into for several weeks there, have you ever had a family of another race in your home for dinner? Just a simple question. Have you ever had a family of another race, their family having dinner with your family in your home? Almost always the answer that came back to me was, I know people of another race, or I have friends of another race, or I have people that I work with of another race. And I would smile at them and say, that's not what I asked. Let me do it again. Has your family ever had a family of another race in your home for dinner? Now that uncomfortable question I've left with people. And when they finally come back to me and say no, the next question's obvious. Why? Well, why is that? So once we break through that, typically someone would say to me, I don't know who I would invite. And I would say, okay, we just hit the next issue. Then why don't you have a relationship with someone from another culture, another race? Well, why is it not that you're not comfortable enough to even invite them for dinner at your home? Why would that be? And so we started a process we just call Solution Sundays. It's not a big program. It's not anything else. And I've had multiple groups that try to start making it into a program. It's simpler than that. It's dinner, okay? It's starting there. I've had churches that have contacted me and said, okay, our church is going to partner with another church of another race, and we're going to meet in the fellowship hall, and I was like, stop. This is not a programmed event. We're on a Sunday night, 2 churches get together in fellowship hall and have a potluck and do that thing and then leave. That's not it. We've done that before. I want people to have the uncomfortable moment of trying to figure out who I would invite, not who someone else assigned to me. Who would I invite to my home? And then the uncomfortable moment of, what are we going to talk about? Because if you do a big public meeting, someone else is talking at a platform. If it's at your home, you got to figure out what you're going to talk about. And it pushes people in exactly what you were talking about. There's something very powerful about sitting around the dinner table to do that. What I say to people is we'll never get all the issues on race on the table until we get all of our feet under the same table. It's a simple idea to sit down and not say we're going to have a national conversation, because no one knows what that means. We're going to have a family conversation. Your kids are going to see kids of another race at your table, and you're going to develop a friendship. What's so hard about that? But it's breaking a barrier on that. Now, that's not all poverty related, but is racial related. And that's just one of the aspects. So whether it's a handicap or whether it is a race issue or a cultural issue, or even learning how to be able to drive through a neighborhood, and not just drive through a neighborhood, but to be able to stop and look at houses and say, who lives there? And what are we doing to make sure that person has every opportunity that I had? Just a simple question. What else? Oh, I get to say uh-oh again.
So the simplest thing that we could do to restore the family is to take a look at the 80 different welfare programs and recognize that every one of those programs penalizes low-income couples when they get married.
Right.
The Earned Income Tax Credit, for example, typically would reduce the income of a cohabiting couple by about 10% if they bothered to get married. I've talked about this for a long time, and it's very difficult to get Republicans to have any interest in doing anything about this. I'm wondering, but it would seem to me that if you do want couples to get married, you probably ought not to have a big sign up that says,
marriage penalty,
get married and we'll take your money away. Is there any prospect that we might actually be able to do something about this in the future?
It is absolutely my hope to be able to do that. We've talked about this multiple times before. We've talked about the marriage penalty for a long time, and in some of the programs, the marriage penalty has been fixed, and some of them it absolutely has not been. I had in my small group in my home with my church a couple that was there that he had a disability, was SSDI, by the way, and by the way, he shouldn't have been, but that's a whole different issue. And he was new to come to church and everything else, and so we're trying to help connect and mentor and be able to walk through the process with him. And in a conversation that I just had with him point blank, with he and his wife, I found out that's really not his wife. They've lived together for years. And I just said, hey, how long do y'all live together? And I think it was like 10 or 15 years. And I said, you know what, at some point you probably ought to call that marriage and just do a ceremony. And his exact response was, I can't because I'll lose part of my benefits from Social Security disability. And so we will never get married. And it's the realization that conversation happens all over the place. If we, and going back to the Brookings statement there, I said the word again, sorry. If I go back to the Brookings conversation, the very simple thing, if we acknowledge that it is better for people to escape poverty if they're married and for their kids to grow up in a home that is stable, then we should affirm that in our federal policies as well. That shouldn't be rocket science. There was a group of us, and several of us were here, that were in Anacostia not long ago, back in August, wasn't it? Yes. Yeah, and I was visiting with some of the folks there, and they were 20, 21, 22 years old, and several of them were looking for different jobs and trying to engage, and they're in a really sharp program to try to help them in that process. Two of the conversations really stuck out to me. One is I was talking about families and marriage and stability. One of the guys said, my mom had a different guy all the time at the house. He said, I don't know who my dad was, and there was always a different guy. And I looked at him and I said, I bet that created a sense of instability in you because you never knew if you were the one next to leave as well. And that kid, 21 years old, started tearing up on me and said, that's exactly how I felt. We lose track of, when we affirm marriage, we affirm stable kids, because they grow up different with a different sense of optimism. And again, that's quote unquote not federal policy, but we're going to be passionate about getting people out of poverty. It is federal policy. And if we discourage marriage, we shouldn't do that. Here's the opposite, and here's one few people know. Do you realize in veterans benefits, we have a marriage bonus? That if you're a service-disabled veteran and you're married, you get a higher amount. But if you're on Social Security disability and you're married, you get a lower amount. We incentivize marriage with our vets, and we discourage it with everyone else in official federal policy. We have a real problem with that. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
To follow up on that, not only do you lose your benefits, there is a move in some states that if you have a neurological disability and you've entered into a marriage contract without a, quote, guardian's approval, there is a move to abolish that marriage. Wow. Also, one of the reasons why I'm here today and why what I do is important and what you're talking about is important is because 80% of people with disabilities, especially physical disabilities, live in poverty. And if they try to work out of that, they lose Medicare and Medicaid, which means they lose their medical equipment and can't get to work.
Yep, and there is a cap of how much they can save, there's a cap of how much they can set aside, and if you're a family with a child that's a disability, and let's say the family, and this happens in multiple instances where the family is older with a child and they realize I'm nearing death and I want to make sure I'm taking care of my child, you can't. You can't do it. You can't set aside a trust to be able to help maintain that child in the future. You're dooming them to poverty forever, and that is federal policy right now. So yes, ma'am, that's one of the many issues. We have time for one more question, or where are we on time? right. We have one? Okay, there you go.
I just wondered if you could talk about the new administration and maybe some areas of areas that you're hopeful for progress in the areas of fighting poverty.
Well, there's a tremendous amount of unknown right now with new administration. I'd love to be able to tell you, yes, they've said they're going to do this on poverty, and so let's go help them. But there's been almost no policy they've said we're going to do this on. So we're trying to figure out where they're going to go. What I do know is what the past administration's focus on poverty was. And it looked like we have for the last 50 years. And while that may provide people sustainability where they can survive, it's not good pathways out. And so I'm hopeful in some of the areas, for instance, on religious liberty, that this administration will be more open to saying, we don't mind faith-based groups being able to partner and be able to engage in all these areas as well. We're not going to discriminate on people because they have faith. So that would help us in that, to be able to help bless some of that activity that's very efficient that's happening in communities all over the place. But a lot of it, we just don't know. We were talking before about the different entitlement benefits and such and the marriage penalty. I would hope that we can finally address that. But during the campaign, no one talked about entitlements during the campaign, just like there was never any conversation about debt and deficit during the campaign. So some of that's an unknown, where they're actually going to head and what are some of the priorities. That will come up again for us, and I hope that we can get a chance to find a good partner to be able to help in that. I do believe there's a passion within the language of both Trump and Pence as well to deal with issues of poverty, and I hope there's a real openness to be able to aggressively go after that. We're about to find out together. Hey, all, thanks for allowing me to be a part of this conversation. I really do appreciate it, and I'm glad so many people are engaging in this. If there's anything I can leave you with, don't study poverty, go interact with people. Be there and be around, and so you can learn it up close and personal, and then find your slice, because there is no one carrying the answer. Find your slice of it and go after it, and see what we can actually do all together on it. Thanks, y'all. Bless you.